Welcome back. We're going to continue with Chapter 6, which focuses on Athena and a little bit on Poseidon. So the theoretical lens for this chapter, we're switching to looking at a particular movement initially in linguistics and then later in other fields like anthropology and literary studies called structuralism. So the structuralism starts in linguistics with a man named Ferdinand de Saussure, who argued that the way language works, the way words have themselves, because the sounds by themselves don't have meaning. The word chair, there's nothing about that word that it indicates something that you sit on. It's just that by convention, in English, that word means something that you sit down on. And it has, a particular. When we say the word, we can imagine in our head such a device. But in another language, for instance, in Latin, the word would be sella. If it's a chair that doesn't have armrests, or it would be cathedra if it did have armrests. And so there, it's a different word. And there's nothing more chair-like about sella than the word chair. Right? So it's the attribution of meaning to words is arbitrary. They end up being sort of agreed on by people. Everyone in English, when they hear the word talking about. Words change meaning over time. They can move. I mean, the word chair, for instance, can also refer to a chairperson of a committee. So it has expanded meanings that it would not have originally had. It would have been simply the device on which you sit. And words have meaning in pairs of opposites. So maybe might be paired together, so that we know there's a difference. The table you sit on, and so we get the meaning of words in pairs of opposition. And if you think of it, sometimes this binary way of looking at things, man, woman, dark, light, those sort of things, that is sort of how we know what they mean, right? It is not the opposite thing, so things are grouped in pairs of opposites. That, of course, then comes to be used by anthropologists and also by literary people to look at customs of primitive peoples in the case of anthropologists, and study people. So elements with dreams. So one way to look at this in there, but is to look at, and myths have a quality that makes them like dreams, right? They're fantastic, weird things happen, things that are not sort of possible in the day-to-day world we live in, right? So, I mean, you might dream, for instance, that you're flying without, a plane or something that would help you fly. Obviously, you can't do that. If you try that in reality, if you jump off a roof, you're just going to fall and die. Well, and probably fall and die. So, but in dreams, you often can do those sort of things. Or maybe you can lift up, a bus, something you would not be able to do in your waking life. Psychologists have looked at works and how experiences are. And Freud was compared myths to, at least, in writing, to dreams. So dreams are the individual's way of organizing things in some sort of metaphoric way that is divorced in some way from the day-to-day reality, whereas the myth is the cultural, the society's way of organizing. Myths are public, whereas dreams are private. Carl Jung is more important in a way in looking at myths, and we'll see more about Jung in the next chapter's theoretical lens. We'll look at myth through the Jungian lens. Was the one who came up with the idea of the organized, and you've got certain types of characters in stories. And if you think of like superhero stories or big science fiction epics like Star Wars, you'll see these. So you've got like the helpers. You've got right the hero. You got the hero, but the hero always says helper. The hero might have an older advisor, someone who's wiser, has been through this stuff. And if you think of Star Wars, you can see this, right? So Luke has Han Solo. He also has the droids who are helping him, and Leia. Leia also serves initially as the damsel in distress, the princess that has to be rescued. And he's got the older advisor, Obi-Wan, and then later Yoda, who give him advice and help sort of set him on the right path. Sort of baked into storytelling, at least in the West, these types of Jung brought that to the mix in looking at myth. And myths, of course, as it says here, convey many messages, not just hopes and fears. Freud would have more concerned with, like, dreams. What do they show that you're afraid of, or what do they show that you're hoping for? Here, this marble votive relief. It's a relief. It's a little plaque. It's a votive relief, meaning it was put up in memory of someone as a prayer. And it says pensive Athena. I've heard this also called mourning Athena. Plaque herself. So this is a plaque, but on the plaque you have Athena looking at another sort of plaque, and it's like a tombstone or dead on the plaque. So she's looking down. We know this is Athena. She's dressed in the peplos, which is standard garment for women. That nothing unusual there, but she's got the helmet on the Acropolis. So that also helps identify the figure as Athena. So now we're going to move more into structuralism. So Claude Lévi-Strauss, who was an anthropologist, was a noted structuralist. He was interested in how the human mind structured experiences and then created similarly structured stories and codes of behavior. He argued mind structures information in terms of opposition. So that's from de Saussure. Night versus day, male versus female, good versus bad, sort of binary pairs. And Lévi-Strauss, one of his books, he looked at primitive societies, was Cooked, in which he argues that when it is seen as barbaric if we were to, for instance, kill a cow and then just grab hold of the raw flesh and just start eating it, right? That would be seen as barbaric. But if we kill a cow, cut it up, process it, cook it, and it comes out and it's a steak, then that's okay, provided you're not a vegetarian or a vegan. But for everyone else, that would be okay. So what happened to make it okay? The fact that it's cooked, that it's changed from the animal to meat. And of course, we have certain barriers you don't cross, right? So killing a human being and cooking the human being and eating it, that would still not be okay, right? That would still be seen as barbaric and awful. But with animals, we have that. And if you look at the English vocabulary for food, for meat, for different types of meats, in many cases, for the animal is different than the word for the animal as meat. So you've got cow, but it's beef. You've got chicken, which can also be chicken, but it can also be poultry. You've got pig. This works out in English because for 200 years after the Norman invasion, French, so the nobles were speaking in French to their servants who were Anglo-Saxons, so they were speaking in English. So when they heard the lords ask for pig to be presented for them at a banquet, they heard pork, and so then it came up where it's a pig if it's alive, it's pork if it's meat and is cooked, right? So that I mean, in English that works out rather nicely because of the accident of England being controlled by a foreign power that did not actually totally undermine the language of the natives. An invader comes in and totally wipes out the language of the people who've been invaded. That did not happen in the case of England, but a lot of French words came into England. The upper class were speaking French and the lower class were speaking English. But Lévi-Strauss, this binary opposition in language, affected the binary opposition of the human mind. So the human mind has two parts, right? There's a left part and a right part. and there's a small bridge that joins the two parts together. That small bridge is thinner, is smaller in a male than it is in a female, which may indicate some physical difference between men and women in how they look at things. I mean, the female mind may have more interconnection because of the bigger bridge between halves than the male mind, which can be maybe more laser focused on things. Of course, there are males who can sort of have both parts of their brain speaking more, and you have females where they're able to sort of limit that and focus. It's not an absolute, but there is something for that view. So for Levi-Strauss, what he did is when he looked at the stories of these cultures that he studied, he'd look at what are the underlying oppositions, what are the binary pairs. He would break the myths down into smaller units where you could see these, and then that would show you the underlying social values of the society which produced the myth. So in this section, the theoretical lens from chapter 6, we're going to have Simon Goldhill's introduction to the Oresteia, and Goldhill uses this binary opposition focus, looking at the Oresteia, the days about Orestes, the Agamemnon, the libation bearers, and the Eumenides. Right, you've got the newer gods, Apollo and Athena, versus the older gods who were represented by the Furies. The newer gods are more interested in the city. The Furies are more interested in late organization, right? So there's this sort of split through, and you can map this out for yourself, and see how it works. Now that's ideally going to get you to some sort of greater truth. And in Levi-Strauss's case, he said one of the things that myth does is it'll show you these binary pairs, but it also shows you that those binary pairs are limiting and that there's something beyond that. I mean, if you see the word as good versus evil, then the side you're on is you're going to identify with the side you're going to present as evil, no matter how many good things that side does, right? So that's a problem because it's much more complete. So the comparison here, the myth that we're looking at is from Egypt. We're looking at a work called the Cosmogonies of the Temple of Esna. Esna is it's in Lower Egypt, where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean, but it goes quite a bit inland. So it's at the maybe southernmost part of Lower Egypt, Esna, and there was a temple there, and there is the cosmogony that was, in the temple. So the textful, and it tells the story of the goddess Neith, and we'll look at more with the slides. But I think that presentation-wise, this is one of the weakest parts in Maurizio's book. I think that the Cosmogonies does not demonstrate what she claims, and I think that's a mistake. If you're making claims, what you present should back up your claims, or if it doesn't back up your claims, you need to explain why you've got it, even though it doesn't actually back up your claims, and that doesn't happen. It plays a key role in debates on the relationship between Greece and Egypt. There was a man named Martin Bernal who wrote a book. It's a huge book called Black Athena, and he argued that the Greek gods, some of the Greek gods, Athena especially, actually an Egyptian goddess that was adopted by the Greeks and of course became a Greek goddess, but she is not originally a Greek goddess. And when the book came out, when the first volume came out, it was very controversial. A lot of people felt that though Egypt had some effect on Greece, and that's undeniable, the Greeks' trading post at Naucratis, and if you look on the map, you can see it in Egypt. And so they did interact with the Egyptians. They also were hired as mercenaries to fight for one side or other in each of the monuments in Egypt. So we know that the Greeks and the Egyptians did have a connection. It was an on Greeks valued the Egyptians as a much older culture, and therefore sort of like an older to themselves. So we do know that, but the extent to which the Greek gods owe what they look like and everything else to the Egyptians and their features is a I think still remains a bit of a stretch. But I've not read the book, so that we have to take that as sort of as a cautionary thing, because it's possible if I were to read it that I would be overwhelmed by Bernard. I mean, a 3-volume work on this suggests that he did spend a lot of time on the matter. Now, the ancients, especially Herodotus, Herodotus wrote a 9-chapter work called the Persian Wars. Generally, we call it the history of the Persian Wars. He doesn't call it anything. In his opening statement, he says these are the histories of Herodotus of Halicarnassus. And by histories, he means research. This is the research done by Herodotus. And the framing narrative, though, is it's trying to explain why the Greeks and the Persians fought. And so that's the highlight of the work, books 7, 8, and 9 books. He talks about the Mediterranean in general, and in book 2, he deals specifically with Egypt. Now, Herodotus is not a trained, archaeologist or anthropologist or anything like that, and he did not speak Egyptian. So when he went to Egypt, he sort of owed a lot to locals who may very well have been telling him a lot of stuff that may or may not have been true. So he's not always a reliable source. But Herodotus claimed that the Egyptian goddess Neith, 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 was in fact equivalent to the Greek goddess. Now, by that, he would have said, had he known the Romans, would be the equivalent of Athena, and they're the Mediterranean, that he would have said would have been equivalent. He is not saying entirely that the Greeks got their gods from the Egyptians, although he does say something about, he says that the Greeks got the names for the gods from Egypt, by which he seems to mean the conception of the gods. So the anthropomorphic nature of the gods, some of that may have come from Egypt, seems to be what Herodotus is saying. The fact that you have an ancient Greek historian, he lived in the 5th century BCE, making that claim, it does indicate that that was probably a view that the Greeks shared, that their gods and the Egyptian gods could be equated one with the other. The goddess Neith was the equivalent of Athena. So here's a little history. In the Archaic period, the Egyptian king Psammetichus I reunify Lower Egypt is north and Upper Egypt is south. He later settled them in Egypt, let them have a town in Naucratis in return for their service. There was also Cyrene, which is on the North African coast, where the Greeks also had a city-state. Most interactions between Greece and Egypt revolved around trade, and it was sort of limited to trade. So the Egyptians were fine with the Greeks being trading partners. They didn't see the goals. And Naucratis, this Greek colony in Lower Egypt, was the sort of HQ of Greek trade in Egypt. Who have closely regulated and restricted contact between Egyptians and Greeks. That's not entirely surprising. I mean, that's true for a lot of cultures, that when a foreign group, a group that's not native to the area, comes in, they're viewed with suspicion by the locals, and there's an attempt to regulate them in some way so that they don't either contaminate or cause trouble for the native population, the people. In the histories, this is the work by Herodotus, he describes the work of her to Athena. Wall painting from the Esna, which is in the southernmost part of Lower Egypt. She is wearing the red crown in Lower Egypt. The white crown is the crown of Upper Egypt. So here she is receiving sort of offerings from a worshiper. She's sitting on the throne there on the left. Neith is depicted as the protector of Lower Egypt and its king. She protects the king on his journey to the realm of the dead and is also the protector of Osiris. So she has a connection with Ed and the protection of souls going to the dead. So that makes her sort of more like Hermes. She also seems to have been associated with weaving, particularly wrappings for the dead. Well, that's true. I mean, so the preparation of the bodies, right, the mummification process, and weaving would be involved and be used to wrap the mummies. But is that really her in weaving, or is that her in taking care of the dead? I mean, it seems like it's more the latter than the former. So again, this seems to be like maybe stretching things to make the equivalence between Athena and Neith closer, and I'm not sure it is as close as Maurizio presents it, or at least she doesn't make that closeness clearer. She's worshipped with a lamplight festival that celebrates her creation of the world. And of course, this is compared to the torch procession that occurs at the end of the Eumenides, and that was apparently part of the festival in honor of Athena. There was a torchlight procession. It was a torchlight procession for the Eleusinian mysteries. So I'm not exactly sure that says anything. I mean, that might very well be just a common feature of many gods and goddesses, that they, especially if they have a night portion of worship. I mean, there was worship to Dionysus where there was like drinking at night. Well, there'd be torches then as well. So that again seems to me not enough evidence to show a connection. Herodotus treated the similarities between the two as evidence that they were the same goddess, and he does that with other gods as well, right? So, Hammon or Ammon as being sort of the same. So he does do that. He does make that claim. Whether Neith had influence on the development of the attributes of Athena is still questioned. Based on this chapter, it does not seem strong. When you read the cosmogonies, the excerpt from the cosmogonies of the Temple of Esna, what we get is Neith is much closer to Gaia. She's a creatrix goddess. And Athena is not that. Athena is clever. Athena does make things, but she is not a god. Whereas Neith does actually sort of start the ball rolling in creation in the accounts. So, there may be more of a connection. Bernal's book might actually point this out between Athena and Neith. I think that Maurizio does not making that clear in this chapter. On the reception, so here we're going to look at the Nachleben, and this I also feel is a little bit weak as far as the presentation goes. Athena was a political, military, and unifying goddess and symbol of the Athenian state. That's absolutely true. Athena is their patron goddess and the patron of everything that it means to be an Athenian. That's fine. And as such, she is a female figure in a basically male world, the world of politics and the army. Female modern nations. Both Marianne in France and the Statue of Liberty in America are allegories for abstract political values and can be traced back to Athena. Since abstract concepts tend to be female nouns, Athena is uniquely suited to representing them. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. The figure of Marianne, whom we see in this painting over here, Liberty leading the people. Liberty is the female figure with the torn dress and sort of like bonnet on her head. That is actually the figure of Marianne. So Marianne is this French woman, French peasant woman, who is seen as a sort of fighter in the revolution, and she becomes sort of a symbol for France and for liberty. So there's nothing particularly Athenic about this, other than you have a female figure fighting in war. The word in liberty in French, liberté, and the word libertas in Latin that it comes from are both feminine nouns. And as such, when they are turned into, when they are anthropomorphized as women because the nouns are feminine, so they become females. And abstract concepts in Latin, almost all of them are feminine nouns. So all of those virtues become goddess figures for the Romans. But say that they're the same as for me to be a bit of a stretch. Athena inspired two political allegories in France, Liberté. Marianne was destined to represent the French Republic and stood for liberty. She was the people, as opposed to the ruling class. Liberté, also a woman, is depicted as more active and martial. Well, Marianne is, as in that painting by Delacroix, is right there in the middle of the fighting, right? She's stepping over dead bodies. Martial to me. Liberté, I think, is presented in a more classical way, right? She looks more, she's wearing generally the peplos that you might see in ancient Greek art. She is dressed as a commoner. This is Marianne, rather than and is more unrestrained and fearless. I think that's, again, Marianne more than Liberté. So here we have a statue of the Republic by the Maurice brothers, and here we have Liberté atop this. She's wearing basically a peplos. She's holding an olive branch indicating peace, but she represents the Republic. She also represents liberty. And then the Statue of Liberty recalls both Marianne and Athena, representing both liberty and reason. Well, again, not so much Marianne, right? This is this figure here. She's dressed in classical garb. She's holding her hand aloft, rather like the statue of Athena, palm, and lifted up. So some hint of the great statue of Athena, Parthenos from Athens, but again, the concept of liberty, libertas, freedom, liberté in French, and libertas, the Latin word before it, which means freedom in English, that feminine noun, and therefore it becomes a goddess figure. And I don't think we need to see anything more than that. I mean, there are things here. She's got this crown with the points on it that seems to... That is not necessarily particularly Athena, right? That's more sort of like almost like it was a halo type thing. So I think it's sort of a bit of a stretch. Now, what happens with the statue was a gift from France to the United States. The goal was to get it to the United States in 1876, which was the centennial of the Declaration of Independence. That did not happen. It didn't get to the U.S., didn't get put together until 1886, so it ended up, but it was a gift for the centennial. And the purpose of the Statue of Liberty was more as a mother of exiles. Her role as the Virgin Mother of immigrants makes her similar to the role Athena played for Athens. Again, this seems to be a bit of a stretch. Athenians didn't like foreigners. There were foreigners who lived in Athens, but they didn't have much in the way of rights. So it's not quite like the non-Athenians into Athens. That, in fact, was not the case. They put up with them, but they were not really welcoming to them. So that's a bit of a stretch. But the idea that this is a virgin goddess, okay, and here she's, as I said, she's been transformed into a mother of immigrants welcoming the United States. And to really cement this, a poet named Emma Lazarus wrote a poem called The New Colossus, where she was comparing the Statue of Liberty to the Colossus of Rhodes, a great statue of Apollo that stood, it was a lighthouse, and it held up a torch, so similar to this. But this wants you to give, you're tired, you're poor, you're yearning to be free, right? So this idea that this is the gate to the new world, the gate that will welcome people who have been cast off by their own countries, but the United States will welcome them, and they will become a vital part of the United States, right? That switch is really because of that poem, right? So the figure of the Statue of Liberty was originally just a statue in honor of liberty, but it got turned into the idea that we were a beacon to the world and that we were a place that welcomed foreigners in to be part of our national experience. Both point 4 of this chapter, I think that Maurizio doesn't do a good job of really making her point. I think the point she makes is fine, but I think she doesn't really back it up very well. She doesn't explain it very well, and she doesn't provide enough evidence to really support that. But that doesn't invalidate it totally, but I do want that caution to be out there.